This episode of The Edge is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and help Trek.fm at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the nonprofit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org. And if you want to join the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode, join the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field. We look forward to seeing you there.
You're listening to Trek FM.
What have you done out there on the edge of Federation space?
Hello and welcome to The Edge, Trek FM's show about Star Trek Discovery. This week we're going to be discussing Episode 5. But before we get into that, a little bit of news. My name is Mike. And later on, Brandon is going to be hosting the episode discussion. But before we get into that, I'm joined by Bruce from Literary Treks. How's it going, Bruce?
It's going great, Mike. I'm so glad to be talking about Discovery once again. But this time not live.
Yeah, I mean, I introduced you as the host of Literary Treks, I think because, well, I mean, I guess... Because it's sort of like the perfect intersection for you.
Yes.
Because, yes, in addition to hosting Literary Treks, you also host Live from the Edge.
I live at Literary Treks, but then I visit Live from the Edge on Monday nights. 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific.
Yes, and be sure to tune in for a lively discussion about the Star Trek Discovery episode that you just watched. But today, what we're going to be talking about is not the Star Trek Discovery episode you just watched, but the Star Trek Discovery novel, which you will be reading on, like, February 6th or something like that,
yes,
right?
February 6th, 2018.
Yes. So this book, which is written by Dayton Ward, is called Drastic Measures, and it is the second Star Trek Discovery novel after Desperate Hours, which was released a few weeks back, and which you can hear all about on Literary Treks, where Bruce and Dan talk to the author himself, David Mack. So go on over there and check that out.
Episode 206, Literary Treks. Yes, check it out.
Yeah.
It's a very good, long interview, but it's all worth it.
Wait. Are you telling me that David Mack talked for a long time?
We had to, like, really get it out of him. It took a while. No, basically we're just like, David, you wrote a book, go, and he just takes off.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, no, he's great to talk to for sure, and definitely check out the book as well because I don't know about you, but I enjoyed it quite a bit. But you know, always looking forward to the future, right? I mean, that's what Star Trek is, and we're looking forward to the future of Literary Treks, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
see what I did there?
Yeah, you worked it right in.
With Drastic Measures. So, okay. Now, we were in the room together at Vegas when we found out that Dayton Ward was going to be writing book 2 of this series.
Yeah, and not only did we find out, is the way we found out. It's like, you know, they had David Mack up there, and they had other people up there talking about writing for the books and the comics for Discovery, and then all of a sudden, halfway through the panel, they're like, we're getting a second novel, and here he is, the author, and the, like, doors part open, he makes this grand entrance. It's Dayton Ward, and here he comes.
Exactly, yeah. It was pretty exciting, and they didn't really tell us anything then. The only thing that he told us was it takes place 10 years before the start of Discovery, and it involves an incident which is important to the history of Star Trek, and it involves 2 characters from Discovery. And I remember us speculating about it. Well, I wasn't speculating. I turned to you and said, what event would that be? And you're like, oh, well, sounds like the launch of the Enterprise, right?
Yes.
And we were like, but the year, that seems like it's off or whatever, but that was the only thing that we could think of. Well, it turns out we're wrong. I think you need to turn in your Trek FM hosting card.
Well, I don't know, because I did talk to Dayton about it before the information about the novel came out, and I gave him my speculation, but he's crafty in a way that he led me to believe I was right, but I don't know. Maybe I'm still right. I don't know. Maybe that's still in there, but
could be. But what it says on the book, I mean, should we just read the description?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a very long description. It's 2246, 10 years prior to Battle at the Binary Stars, and an aggressive contagion is ravaging the food supplies of the remote Federation colony Tarsus 4 and the 8,000 people who call it home. Distress signals have been sent, but any meaningful assistance is weeks away. Lieutenant Commander Gabriel Lorca and a small team assigned to a Starfleet monitoring outpost are caught up in the escalating crisis and bear witness as the colony's governor, Adrian Kodos, employs an unimaginable solution in order to prevent mass starvation. While awaiting transfer to her next assignment, Commander Philippa Georgiou is tasked with leading to Tarsus for a small, hastily assembled group of first responders. It's hoped this advance party can help stabilize the situation until more aid arrives, but Georgiou and her team discover that they're too late. Governor Kodos has already implemented his heinous strategy for extending the colony's besieged food stores and safeguarding the community's long-term survival. In the midst of their rescue mission, Georgiou and Lorca must now hunt for the architect of this horrific tragedy and the man whom history will one day brand Kodos the Executioner.
So that's why I was wrong in my prediction. It had nothing to do with I thought. It had to do with this episode from TOS.
Yeah, Conscience of the King.
Yep.
Which I just watched like 2 weeks ago, coincidentally. So it's kind of fresh in my mind. I mean, this is I don't know. It's interesting because there is a lot of history in the original series. A lot of things where, obviously it's just like a one-off thing, like this happened and it's relevant to this story. But then this is a massive event, it's about a guy who killed half the people on this colony in order to save the other half. And if I'm not mistaken, Kirk's there, right?
Mm-hmm,
He's on that colony.
So we'll probably get to see, well, I don't know. We may see Kirk as a young man in this. He would be about 13, something like that at this time.
I guess. Yeah, I wasn't thinking he'd be that young, but yeah, I guess you're right.
Yeah, and it's also fresh in my mind because in the past year we've done some reviews on literary treks. We've had the autobiography of James T. Kirk, where this event was in, and also Avenger from the Shatnerverse. So, and there was some mention of that. So it's been addressed in some of the literary works, but I think this will be from a different perspective. And of course, the different books can contradict themselves at times, but I think this might work in well with what we've read before in this episode, the TOS episode. And then we have maybe a young Kirk showing up, and maybe even Sarek could show up, because Sarek shows up in one of the books. Interesting.
Yeah, I imagine, since, Ward has such a history with the novels, he's probably going to, do that thing which we've seen. Well, we saw it in Desperate Hours, with, naming the number one Una and stuff like that. There's no reason, just because this is semi-canonical, there's no reason to abandon things which were established in the novels that don't contradict, everything else.
Well, especially with Sarek, because we know Georgiou has a history with Sarek, and maybe this is where that history starts.
Oh, I like it. And I like the idea of it being, a prequel, and not only getting to see the two captains before they were captains, but also the two captains team up, because they're so different from each other, and we see both of them through the eyes of Burnham on the show. And now to kind of see, it's like your two favorite teachers, what do they do when they hang out together or whatever, it's exciting because obviously they're very different people. And it'll be interesting to see how they deal with this crisis. You know?
I think I'll find this more exciting than two teachers hanging out together.
I guess it depends on the two teachers, you know. But yeah, I don't know. It's a very interesting premise, and I think that, you know, finding this event in the past and finding a way to sort of like further the character development of the people on Disco through this event seems kind of ingenious, you know?
It does, yeah. I love the fact that we can explore Star Trek history and events now through these new characters and through this new show. We can do something in the books that we can't do on the TV show, not as well. And so with Desperate Hours, we had, of course, the Shenzhou crew and the Enterprise crew team up together, and now we're seeing Lorca and Giorgio team up together in the past with a Star Trek event that we've known about for 50 years.
Yeah. And, you know, it's something which, I mean, I think they had to do because of the nature of Discovery, where you couldn't really treat this like your typical, you know, tie-in novels from the past, from Star Trek's past, where it's just like, here's a random event in Next Generation that occurred between these two episodes, because why not, you know? We didn't see what happened when they were driving from point A to point B, but Discovery is so tightly knit that you really got to find the gaps. And I think, you know, like looking to the past so that you're not messing up whatever they're going to do in the future seasons of the show or whatever. I mean, it just makes sense to do this. And I think that it's really cool how you can kind of, since there is such a large cast and so many people who we don't get to spend a lot of time with, I think it's cool to sort of like, you know, give Lorca and Giorgio their sort of moments to shine, you know, without Burnham, you know, hogging the spotlight or whatever you want to call it, you know, for this particular story.
Yeah. And what really works well with these books that we learned when we were speaking with David Mack, and I'm sure the same is true with Dayton Ward, is they've been exposed to the scripts of these episodes of Discovery well in advance before we've seen them. So they know what's coming up. So when they write these books, they can take from what they know is happening with the show and write around that and bring elements of it into their stories. So it's not like they're going in blind and they just have a Bible of, okay, these are the characters and this is what they're like and go with it. They know how this is going to fit into the rest of the story. So there's hints of things that may be coming up in the TV show that you'll find in these books. And then when you see those episodes and then maybe even go back to the book, you'll go, aha, I didn't pick that up before, but that connects to this and that connects to that. And that's the fun and the beauty about how this relationship between the authors and the TV show writers working together. That's the beauty of this coming together. And same with the comics too, which we have yet to see the comics, but they have that relationship also.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about that specifically on this show with Desperate Hours, and you know how reading the book enhances, you know, our viewing of the show, and I think that I think that it does, and this one comes out. I mean, I guess they haven't officially announced when the new season is coming back, but this book should be out before like the last 2 or 3 episodes air, I think.
Yeah, that's about right.
So it'll be interesting to see, and you know, I'm definitely looking forward to it, and you know, we're definitely going to be talking about it on this show briefly, as I'm sure you guys will be talking about it on Literary Treks. So
absolutely, I'm sure Dayton will come on to the show when the book is released, so we'll dig deep into the book. But again, that's on February 6th. And it's 304 pages. Now, this is a trade paperback, so the height of these books is a little taller than a regular paperback. It's going to be very similar to the size that we saw in Desperate Hours. But $16 in the U.S., $22 in Canada. And it will also be available as an ebook and as an audiobook, which a lot of people have been clamoring, oh, when do we get audiobooks? Well, thankfully, in the past year or so, we've been finally getting audiobooks from Star Trek again.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, you know, I take advantage of the audiobook thing for sure, you know, listen to it while I'm driving and stuff like that. It's kind of perfect. So I'm excited. I don't know. Yeah, I can't wait to see what he has up his sleeve. So So Bruce, we talked about literary treks. We talked about Live from the Edge. Where else can people find you on the internet?
You can find me on Twitter at Admiral_Rex. That's Admiral with the little underline Rex. And you can also find me talking Star Wars on the Star Wars Report podcast on StarWarsReport.com. And, of course, I'm always in the Babel Conference on Facebook.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for joining me. And, yeah, tune in to Live from the Edge at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific on Monday nights after Discovery airs. And I'm going to toss it now to Brandon to talk about Episode 5 of Discovery.
Well, thank you very much, Mike and Bruce. We appreciate the handoff. We're very excited to discuss this week's episode of Star Trek Discovery, which is called Choose Your Pain. Am I the only one who wants to go back to my youth and pick up a Choose Your Own Adventure novel when I hear that?
No, but I can't say it without saying, choose your pain.
Because that's how the Klingons said it too, hey?
Yeah.
Awesome. I was very excited about this. I've been looking forward to doing this discussion this week. We've got two wonderful guests with me. Joining me from Trek FM's own To the Journey is Kay Shaw. How are you doing, Kay?
I'm doing great. Brandon, how are you?
I am doing fantastic. We haven't done a lot of podcasting together, have we?
Not for a while.
Yeah, it's been a little while, so I'm quite happy to have you on. I'm looking forward to it. And joining us again is Heather Barker from Disco Trek and Shore Leave over on the Tricorder Transmissions. How you doing, Heather?
I'm doing pretty well. That was mouthful, and you said it all perfectly, so thanks.
Excellent. Well, it's a lot easier than Klingon. So.
That's true.
But tonight we're going to be talking about Episode 5 of Star Trek Discovery. As I said, it's called Choose Your Pain. And I think we got quite a bit to talk about in this. I mean, there's some interesting things that really happen in this episode, and I think it gives us a lot to talk about. So I think the first thing that we're going to talk about, just because everybody expects it to talk about, is the foul language. We're just going to get it out of the way. So we were talking a little bit before, Mike, and my only opinion on it is, and I've said this before, I don't have any problem with foul language. I don't have any problem with violence. I love Hannibal. I love Game of Thrones. I just personally don't think that the foul language needs to be in Trek. And I've been very sad this week because I've seen people place a lot of rude comments to people when people have expressed that. And I've seen a lot of intolerance this week because some people just don't want to have swearing in their Star Trek. I don't have a problem with it. I just don't think it needs to be there in Star Trek. You get me off mic and I cuss like a sailor, and I really wish I didn't, but I do. So I clearly don't have a problem with swearing. But it just doesn't need to be there. Was the moment funny? Yeah, I laughed. I thought it was hilarious. I thought it was great. But then I'm like, it doesn't really need to be there because it doesn't really advance anything. It's just there because, hey, we're on streaming, so let's get it all out. You know, I've got a 7-year-old daughter. It's easier for me to cover her eyes when there's a ripped apart person on the screen than it is for me to cover their ears, which doesn't really work. Have I sworn in front of my daughter? I have. Have I placed a movie in front of my daughter that has bad language in it? Well, yeah, I didn't realize there was quite that much bad language in Back to the Future when I put it on. But you know what? There really is. So
yeah,
just be tolerant of people out there. And it's extremely frustrating to see some of the comments I've seen where somebody's like, I don't like that bad language in there. And the response is F you. You know, like, I don't know, that's crazy and that's bonkers. So I don't know if you ladies want to add anything to that right now, or if we just want to move on. If you have anything to say, please feel free. If not, we can move on to the rest of the episode. I just think we were expected to talk about it, and I don't want to spend too much time on it. So.
No.
Yeah, I'm kind of in a similar page. I can see both sides of the spectrum. I don't have children, so I'm not as concerned about watching it. We do have a TVMA rating on the show. We've known about that for a long time, so I just think proceed with caution if you do have your kids watching. I'm glad it took so long to get a word like that. It wasn't right there in the first episode or the second, so there's that as a positive, I guess. But I had the same reaction. I laughed, and then I kind of was like, whoa, okay. I don't necessarily have a huge problem with it, but I don't really feel like it adds anything. Like, I feel like And maybe also because it came from Tilly, who is just a very jarring character for me to begin with, because she's so different from anyone else on the ship. So it was a very surprising moment. And I was like, I laughed, and then I was like, oh, okay. I'm glad that it was done the way that it was done. But do I necessarily think it adds anything to Star Trek? No. I don't buy into the argument of there being a precedent with Kirk saying, let's get the hell out of here back in City on the Edge, because yeah, that may have been forward for its time, but we say that word all the time now, that other word that was used, and choose your pain. So by using that word, Discovery's not really setting a precedent or being forward. I think it's pretty much for shock value, and that's why it's on streaming and everything else. So I don't necessarily have a big issue with it, but I don't necessarily like it either.
Yeah, I don't think I have a huge amount to add to that. I don't have an issue with it at all. In fact, I quite liked it in the context. It worked for me, but I absolutely understand other people's opinions. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of all I've got to say on it, really.
I was just going to say that other people have said on there too, well, Data said it in the movie and stuff like that in Generations. Like, it didn't need it to be there either, right? So, I mean, in my opinion, it didn't need to be there either, right? It's just there to get a laugh, which is, just not what I needed. That's all. So
yeah, and you're welcome to your opinion. Your opinion is valid. A differing opinion is valid. All of our opinions are opinions, and they should be respected. It's really sad to see that kind of conversation happening online, and I wish that we could leave that kind of dialogue behind, and just let everyone feel like they're going to feel about Star Trek, and try to find a common ground and to have constructive conversation about things like this, and not hateful conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, you know what they say about opinions? They make an O out of pin and yawn. So, but let's move on. I want to jump into this. This has actually been, even still, this has been my favorite episode of Discovery so far. They're kind of getting better and better every week for me, and I'm really loving it. And I love the way that it went this week. Now, one thing that I wanted to talk about, I've been talking about over the last couple of podcasts that haven't been released yet, but they've been recorded already for Warp 5, is that I really don't think that this show is being presented to us in the format of like a Game of Thrones or Walking Dead style with this arc. And I had said this on my Warp 5 podcast, that to me this is more like season 3 of Enterprise, where we have a season-long story that's going on, yet each individual episode is its own fully contained plot line. And I mean, I was watching today, I just watched the season 7 premiere of Walking Dead, and I'd seen it once before, and in that episode basically it's just two people, and I kept thinking back to this episode, and the style of storytelling that Game of Thrones does is that Game of Thrones and Walking Dead is they will focus on one or two characters for an episode and advance their storyline a significant portion. And here we're still kind of getting that Star Trek format where we're getting a lot of characters at one time. Now, personally, I really like the Game of Thrones and Walking Dead format because it gives us time to spend a lot of time with, maybe your favorite character. Maybe you don't see them. Like Daenerys is my favorite character on Game of Thrones, right? And I may not see her much for 2 or 3 episodes, but then we're going to get one episode where it's all Daenerys all the time, right? It's a kind of thing. So I'm just kind of surprised that they're kind of sticking to that storytelling arc that was done in season 3 of Enterprise. And I'm wondering what you guys think of that. Okay?
What they're doing is really working for me. I've heard an awful lot of things. People have got loads of different opinions, as we've already said, but it's just really working for me. I felt like this last episode in particular, I just felt like we learnt so much about so many of the characters. I don't know how they managed to fit so much into it, to be honest. It really, I just feel like we've learnt loads.
So I think that for me, last night's episode was definitely the most episodic that we've had so far. Someone brought that up in Disco Trek when we recorded last night, and I didn't really think about it until she brought it up, and I was like, wow, it is, because last week I was like, well, what is going to happen with the tardigrade? And frankly, I expected the tardigrade to be in the series for longer. But with this episode, we actually wound up having resolution with Saru and Burnham, with the tardigrade being set free. And then with Stamets and Culber in the end, although there was not really resolution to be had there, but we got to see those two come together and have a nice little ending, sort of. Nice moment with them, and then a different ending. But overall, it definitely felt that way. So I do see how it compares with season 3 of Enterprise, and I'm curious to see what happens moving forward. I've heard that we might have some standalone episodes, and I don't know if those will be like more focused on one character. This episode for sure gave us time with the most characters in the span of 50 minutes or whatever the episode is. So much so we even got the bridge crew, and like all the bridge crew who we have only seen once, like they all got lines this time, which I thought was great.
Yeah, I think that's neat. It's interesting though, but for example, like with the Lorca plotline, had this been in something like Walking Dead or Game of Thrones, Lorca would have been on that Klingon ship for like 3 or 4 episodes.
Yeah.
They may not have shown him a lot for those 3 or 4 episodes, but he would have been stuck there for a while, right? And that's kind of where his story would have done. And this is resolved very quickly, which is fine. It's just not quite what I was expecting when the show came out. I don't have a problem with it. I'm just pointing out something that I'm finding interesting about the storytelling of the season, because we're going through our season 3 retrospective on Enterprise right now, and I'm seeing a lot of very similarities in the type of storytelling as that. So now I want to come back to Lorca and Mudd. I think I want to start talking about tonight with Saru and Burnham and Stamets and the story that's going on there. And I want to talk specifically about Saru first, because Saru is my favorite character on the show, and even after this, he still is. Now, I've heard a lot of people talking on podcasts this week where they're like, I don't like him now because he's this, this, and this, and I don't know if this is a controversial opinion or whatnot, but I'm going to state right off the bat, Saru wasn't wrong in what happened in this episode. Okay, so Saru was not privy to all the information we had. And again, it's a limit of the storytelling option that they've done. This is 3 weeks later, and they've been using this tardigrade for 3 weeks, and this is clearly the first time that Burnham has brought this information up to Saru. Right? Like Saru was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Can you prove this to me? And she's like, no. So this is a rather rapid development after they've clearly been using this tardigrade for 3 weeks for how many successful missions? Like, because when Lorca's talking with the admirals at that starbase, how many successful missions have they done? So many that they're worried the Klingons might know what's going on, so they got to get him to stop. Saru was not wrong in anything that he did. Yes, we're privy to information. In that last episode, we saw the pain that the creature was going through, and we see it again here, right? But I don't know. I think Saru said, look, I understand what you're saying. We will address this after the current emergency is over. And Burnham went behind his back again.
That's what she does. I'm one of those people that really struggled with that moment with Saru. And I think that there is just so much more going on, and it's hard to grasp everything. Saru is acting captain. I think that Saru's suffering from PTSD, from the battle at the Binary Stars and from losing Giorgio. I think that, he's in this episode, he has to do what he needs to do to save his captain. He's not going to make any mistake. And in that, I mean, I have PTSD from a previous relationship. And if I'm in a situation where something triggers me, like I just I don't think logically and I react. And I think that in this case, Saru was really just focused on what he needed to do. He didn't care. He didn't care that the tardigrade was sentient. That was hard for me to hear and to stomach. But he wanted to do what he needed to do to save his captain, because he's not going to lose another captain. Yeah. And at the end of the episode, he looked right at us and he said, I know what I did. Yeah. And so at least in that sense, and after his discussion with Burnham and talking about what was going on, within him, his anger, his jealousy, I think that the fact that he took responsibility in that that confession of saying he knows what he did redeemed him in the end of the episode for me.
Yeah, I do agree with all that, but I also wonder whether or not if it had been anybody else who'd come to him with that, he would have listened. That's something I find really interesting to think about, because I just think he has such a big issue with Burnham, and that's gone back a long way. I don't know whether people have read the book, but I've just finished reading the book, and if you do read the book, there's more about the Burnham-Saru relationship in there that I won't go into too much because I don't want to spoil it for people that haven't read it, but this kind of goes back a ways. It's not just from sort of what happened with Georgiou.
Well, I don't think that you'd spoil anything, because he basically said a lot of that same stuff. I have read the book, and he does say a lot of the same stuff here, where he's like, you overstepped me, and I'm jealous and angry about that, right? Yeah. And we get a more in-depth scene of that in the novel. But this does go back to, to that previous time where he was jealous and angry with her. But keep going, Kay,
Yeah. So I think he's not receptive to anything that she's got to say because he's basically lost all trust in her. So that's a factor in it. I also agree with everything that you said as well, Heather. I think you're right. I think he's got a lot of issues there with what went on, with the fact that he's like, I'm not going to lose another captain. He's already said to Burnham, I can't remember if it was the last episode or the one before, he said to her, I'm going to serve my captain better than you served yours. I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember what he exactly said, but he said something along those lines. He basically said that to, he's not going to make the same mistakes that she made.
He said it here, he's like, saving the tardigrade will neither bring back nor change the fact that this is exactly the kind of behavior that killed Captain Georgiou. And that was like, boom. And
that was a punch, wasn't it?
That is his reality, and I agree that that is a fact. Like, it's not going to change that's what happened. But again, I thought that was a really solid quote, and I wanted to share that. So
yeah, absolutely.
See, but and I like that quote. I think that's a great quote, because he's right. There's still no evidence that this thing is sentient. I mean, yes, it's Star Trek, and it's probably going to end up that way. I understand how Star Trek storytelling is done. But I mean, again, I just can't get past the fact that this is 3 weeks later, and this is the first time they've brought it up to him, and it's brought up in the middle of an emergency, and I think he addresses her concerns like a good leader. He says, okay, I've heard what you said. We'll talk about this when we're done our current emergency. We don't have time to deal with this right now. And so, and he thinks the situation is done. They're ready to take action, and the entire thing has been shut down because Burnham's gone behind his back. Yeah. And I don't know. I think that's an interesting story. That's interesting conflict, and I love it. I think it's great.
Yeah, it's great.
Right? We are privy to more information than Saru. I'm not 100% on Saru's side. I'm just saying I don't think he was in the wrong with the actions that he took based on the information he had.
It's definitely bizarre that after Burnham's reaction in the last episode, watching the tardigrade, and I kept thinking, is she going to do something? Like, I know that she can't, but oh my gosh, like, just, you could see it on her face. And then even the opening scenes that we had with, her at the helm of the spore drive, and then her inside the spore chamber and that whole thing. It's really shocking, and I hadn't thought about it, that yes, it has been 3 weeks, and why has this not been brought up sooner? So because we know what's going on, that's why I feel so much for the tardigrade. But it's a great point that apparently Saru does not know this stuff, and at the end of the day, it's like, well, what do we do in a time of crisis? And what are we doing emotionally? What are we doing logically? Is or isn't something the right choice, which we see when we learn about Lorca, which I'm sure we'll talk about down the road here.
Yeah. See, and what Saru does with that program when he's talking to the computer, and he's like, look, bring up your decorated captains. He's fully aware of what's going on as well. He's like, look, I understand that Burnham is my trigger. Am I doing this because it's Burnham?
Yeah.
Right? And he's fully aware of it while he's making these decisions. And to me, I don't see anything different with him talking to the computer about the situation than Riker going to Picard in, I don't remember the name of the Lessons, when he's like, look, I don't feel comfortable chastising Nella Darren because you're sleeping with her. And Picard's like, go for it. Right? But, he's in an uncomfortable situation. He's like, am I doing this because she's with the captain, or would I be doing this for anybody else? Am I being harder on her because I want to show her that just because you're the captain, I can't play favorites? Am I being that much harder on you? Because people can do that. But Riker's fully aware enough that he can bring his concerns to Captain Picard, but Saru doesn't have that person to talk to on the ship, right? So, I don't know. Again, at the end when he's like, I know what I did, I'm not necessarily comfortable with that ending myself for the character of Saru, because I don't know. I loved it. I think this was great. I think this was wonderful, wonderful plot in this episode.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And I absolutely accept everything that you've said, Brandon, and I agree with you in the beginning. But I think the bit that I found quite shocking in a way was when Culber and Stamets come to him on the bridge and they say, oh, the tardigrade's like desiccated itself, or whatever the term was that they used.
Cryptobiosis.
Thank you. And it's gone into this like state where it's defending itself from threat, basically. And he says, oh, well, just rehydrate it. And just crack it open. And that really surprised me, because at that point they've said, no, look, this is actually a danger to it at this point. And I get that he's down the road of saving Lorca and that's his focus and everything else. But to me, I'm kind of like, the way I see it is Saru, as a prey species, as he's already told us, he must understand more than anyone, I think, how that tardigrade would feel in that situation. And that's why I found it particularly shocking, because I thought he's going to be the one that can relate to it the most. So the fact that he's like, no, just get it wired back up, just get it working, I need it to be working. His focus is elsewhere. I just find it interesting that he can be that focused on what he's doing, that he can just push all of that aside.
I think that addresses your question that you had said earlier, Kay, about would he have reacted that way had anybody else brought it to him? Because, again, here he is in the middle of the emergency. He's got these two people coming to him who aren't Burnham, and he's telling them the same thing. We can't deal with this right now. We're in emergency, and we got to save the ship as well, because they're deep in Klingon space right now at that time, right, too? So...
Yeah, I had a very similar thought with Saru being a prey species, and why didn't he sympathize with this creature there? And again, I kind of refer back to, whether or not he has PTSD, it's just something that I think could explain why he reacted the way that he did. That's just what I'm telling myself, I guess. But, again, we did have that redemption, as I'll call it, in the end, and he did say, we have no claim to its soul, go save its life, Burnham. That's an order, and there we go. I mean, at least in the end he came around.
Yeah. Well, at least we had redemption for Saru rather than Sela in that redemption, right?
Different. Wow, very different.
Okay, so while we're talking about these characters in this kind of plot line, let's jump over to Stamets on this now and his actions that he took. I'm sure I'm not the only one that was blindsided by that and was totally expecting Burnham to throw herself in that machine, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Again, I was on the edge of my seat last episode, like, oh, she's got to do something, so it would make sense. So when that happened, I was just like, what? Yeah. He just risked his life and his career. I mean, I guess his career and his life in that order. So I was shocked, and I loved when he woke up, when he was revived, and it was just like, did we make it? Oh my! And started laughing. That a great
laugh
moment.
Was absolutely incredible, wasn't it? That was amazing. Yeah, initially I was surprised, and I expected it to be Burnham, because he gave it away on the bridge, didn't he? They gave it away. They gave the clue away when Saru says, oh, is the tardigrade ready to jump? And he says, we're ready to jump. He doesn't say yes. And I was like, I like that, because at that point I went, oh, okay, so they've wired Burnham up. Okay. And then when I realised it was Stamets, for a second I was surprised, and then I went, actually, no, I'm not, because they'd already set him up to do it. When they had the whole thing with, oh, but I wanted to be able to talk to my mushrooms.
Yeah.
So actually I was like, no, it actually does make perfect sense that he did it. So, yeah, I thought that was great. I really liked that.
Yeah, in hindsight, it does make perfect sense, but I loved that...
surprise.
Like the misdirect at the beginning of the episode, right? So, now, I've got this is one of my theories. I got two theories, and I'm going to talk about one of them right now, okay? So, I think that this plot line is part of the reason why Burnham was trained by Vulcans. And I think that her dream was her telling her that she's the one who's going to do it. And I think this is how she's going to redeem herself for the crew, is that her Vulcan training is going to make her more able to accept and understand what's going on when she's hooked up to that machine.
Okay.
Right? And so it's going to somehow end up being her using the system. She may not need to be hooked up to the machine. I'm sure they're going to find a non-painful way to do it. But there's something about her and her Vulcan training that leads to believe that's going to have her mind changed in a certain way where she'll be able to understand this in a more what's the word? A better way than Stamets could, right? Because it really took everything out of Stamets. I don't know. That's just kind of one of the things that I'm thinking about.
That's interesting. I'd be interested to see if they go somewhere with that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because that opening scene with her, I was like, well, what was the point of this in the end? Like, what were we really supposed to take from it? Obviously, I'm not going to say she feels the pain. She just knew that the tardigrade was in pain. So she knew what it would experience in there. But it was just like there was that scene and then there was no connection through the rest of the episode back to that scene.
I actually wonder maybe whether or not that dream is the thing that made her in the end go and talk to somebody about it. Maybe that's what they were going for.
Okay.
Yeah, that.
The guilt finally got to her enough with the dream and everything. She woke up and she was like, oh, now I need to actually say something. I've been holding back from this for too long.
That makes sense. It's
Really?
just it's so strange for me to think that she wouldn't just be fighting for the last 3 weeks for it. But that's the best explanation I've heard for that scene so far. So I'm going to take it.
Hey.
Okay.
I only really thought of it actually while we were talking about it then. I thought, oh, maybe that's what they're going for.
It works for me.
Well, so that's how theories sometimes develop, is when you're communicating with other people and talking, then it's like, well, wait a minute, no, this.
Yeah.
But, well, now we've got Stamets who's done this thing, and quite possibly could have affected him in a strange way.
Yeah.
So do you think that what happened at the end of the episode with this weird, bizarre delay in his mirror has anything to do with what happened to him going through that machine?
It's certainly possible.
Related?
Mm-hmm.
I know that there's a theory out there that it's not our universe Stamets that came back.
Yeah.
So it may that may be a possibility. The only thing there is that if the reflection in the mirror is the Stamets that we have known up to this point, I don't find that believable because of the really creepy look that was on his face.
Yeah.
I don't, if our Stamets was in the mirror universe, I don't think he'd be smiling in the mirror like that. The devious, creepy smile from the reflection in the mirror, to me, is more the mirror universe version of him.
Yeah.
I don't know that was that creepy of a look. I think the creepiness factor comes from the music that was playing. I think he was just his smile.
It was pretty creepy.
Right, but if you were caught in the mirror universe and the other, would you, I mean, we don't know what that version of him is looking at, I guess. But I just find it odd that he'd just be sitting there smiling like that.
I don't think it's the mirror universe. I know that there's rumors going around and that we're going to hit the mirror universe at some point, but to me that's just too damn literal.
Yeah,
that he's
it's
looking in a
very
mirror.
Literal. Yeah, my original thought was that this is just something creepy, and that he has changed, or something has changed with Stamets. And this Stamets, not that he's going to be some kind of god or has superpowers, but there's something different about him. And then when I watched it the second time, and I was able to have my computer right in front of me and watch the scene, I was like, oh, well, okay. As the skin and, the hair on the back of my neck crawls.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious to see, if we do have this mirror universe, how that plays in. There's been a lot of people who don't want to see mirror universe. I'm okay with it. I think that so far they've done well with everything they're doing, and I believe there will be a reason that they do it. I really am thinking that at the end of this season, the entire season, we're going to have so many of these questions answered, and so many, it's just going to be in a cute little package with a bow, tied up with, one cliffhanger to bring us back for season 2 that I'm confident we will get.
Yeah.
But I'm really eager. I love every episode. We learn more and more. The puzzle pieces start to fit together, but we continue to be surprised, which I think is so much fun, to be surprised in every episode of Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really interested to find out what's actually going on with Stamets there, because I do agree with you, Brandon. I think if that is actually something to do with the mirror universe, that seems very, very literal, and it's a way of us seeing the mirror universe that we've not seen before, because I don't remember them ever seeing a mirror universe self actually physically in a mirror. That seems a bit weird, but anyway, who knows? I don't quite know what they're doing with it, but I'm wondering whether or not it's something a bit more like this travel that he's done, kind of like when he's been in there, because he's been like physically sort of traveling inside this network, that it's kind of done something with his DNA where he's kind of split, or part of him split off, or he's become like shifted into two separate bits of reality or whatever. Something like that is kind of what I'm wondering about, and whether we're going to see, if he does it again, whether we're going to see it getting worse, whether we're going to see him getting more out of phase. So that's kind of what I'm wondering at the moment, whether it's going to be something like that.
Well, my biggest concern right now, and my hugest problem with this whole thing going on, is I want to know, why do they get a full wall mirror and Burnham has to deal with that hologram in her room? Like, what's up with that? That's not fair.
Well, she's in the cheap seats, isn't she? We've seen that.
Yeah. Really,
Anyway.
it's poor Tilly. Tilly's in the same boat. That's what happens when you're just a cadet.
And it's married person's quarters. I mean, we don't know if they're married, but it's married person's quarters, just for use of the term, basically, isn't it? So
big one.
Maybe they get an upgrade.
But have we actually seen, like, I've just assumed that the tardigrade, or now Stamets, whomever is in the spore chamber, stays in the chamber. Like, they're not physically transported, right?
Sorry, I'm not quite sure what you're saying.
So like, once the physical being is in the spore chamber and hooked up to the little robotic nipple pincher thing, right? So the physical body stays there. It doesn't get like transported out of the chamber.
Right.
Like, it's there. It's used. The whole ship does the jump.
Right.
So I'm curious to the science of how the physical being, tardigrade or Stamets at this point, connects to the spore network. Obviously, there's a physical element, and I don't want to say spiritual, but this opens Stamets' eyes, and he was one with the mushrooms, right?
He was one with the mushrooms.
Yeah, so we know that there is, he's connected to the network, so to speak, an entire universe of possibilities he never knew existed.
Right.
So there is kind of like a metaphysical element to it. And I'm just curious about how the science of all that works. And I assume that will be explained at some point so that we can understand, especially if your theory does work out and Burnham is somehow connected and can use her Vulcan mind powers. That's not what I want to say.
Voodoo.
Her Vulcan mind voodoo. To better control what's happening. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't missing something, and that we haven't really seen how that is explained.
No, to me, the tardigrade never left that thing. Like, he never like shimmered or whatever, like, or anything like that, like the Traveler in that episode, right, or whatever. But I don't know. It's interesting. It'll be interesting to see where they go with this again. We're all speculating at this point in time.
I love these speculations. I have heard so many different things, especially after this episode.
Yeah,
I throw them out on Twitter. I'm like, what do y'all think? It's great. It's a great time to be a Star Trek fan. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, it is great. I'm really hoping that at some point we're going to get to actually see, like, whoever's strapped into the thing, like, see them actually what they see. That's what I want. I'd really like to see, like, from their eyes, like, a map of this mycelium network, and like how they kind of go, them like shooting along it and like seeing the destination at the other end, and then getting a fix like with the transporter kind of thing, and then zooming the ship through. That'd be really cool. I hope we get to see that, because I really want to see more about how that works.
we saw Burnham in there, and Lorca was kind of showing her.
Yeah.
But that was not quite that wasn't the same as being hooked up to the device
Right.
that they found in the Glen. So yeah, I really hope that we'll see that as well, and that we get some further explanation of how it all works.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, let's talk about Stamets and I'm sorry, I don't know the doctor's name right now yet.
Culber.
Culber. Hugh
Culber.
Culber.
Culber. So let's talk about their relationship right now. And so we've only seen Culber for 2 episodes right now, and their relationship out of their quarters has been pretty adversarial so far. And like, but when they're in the room, like they're very tender with each other, right? And so it's really weird to me, this complete dichotomy of emotions between them. And like up until that final scene that we got in this episode, I'm like, are they sure that these people are together? So
See,
I don't know what.
To me, how I see that is we're in a work situation and we're all aware that we're in a relationship. And so there's always a little bit of the relationship there, even though we're trying to be professional. So we're dealing with it with sarcasm is how I'm interpreting it.
Yeah. I wondered because, the majority of us have known that they are a couple. And I've wondered how those who were unaware of that are seeing it. And are they picking up on that without knowing beforehand that they're a couple? And I haven't gotten any feedback on that. But, again, I kind of just assumed it was sake of professionalism. Stamets is the way Stamets is. And I think that in the scene in the beginning where I think Stamets is like, and why are you here, to Culber?
Yeah.
And Culber says something and then mentions that the CMO needs him to do Andorian tonsillectomy or something. The way that he responded to that was just kind of like, all right, I'm just leaving that, going off to work. I think in a way they complement each other. I think it's just a characteristic of their relationship. I kind of liked it. I'm glad that we got to see them together alone and see the other side of their relationship, but I did just kind of chalk it up to being in a work environment.
Yeah, that's how I saw it, definitely.
Okay, yeah, because I was confused. I'm like, maybe I had the wrong character or something.
No, I can see why.
Yeah.
But I mean, again, a lot of people have felt that is just the way Stamets is.
I think that's that, yeah.
And so, fortunately with this episode, we got a lot more from Stamets throughout, as it evolved. And then at the end, we get to see this whole other side before it gets switched in the mirror or whatever.
Yeah, I see him as a bit of a difficult genius, really. He kind of reminds me of Dr. Zimmerman off of Voyager in the way that he is. He's brilliant, but he just can't tolerate people questioning any of his brilliance ever.
I know I'm brilliant.
Don't get in the way.
He's like, I know I'm brilliant. What do you want?
Yeah.
Or something.
We get Troy to come in. You're both jerks.
Yeah. But perfect. Absolutely perfect.
Okay, so I've been leaving this one to the end here. So Lorca, Harry Mudd, and the Klingons. So I'm guessing this is L'Rell. I haven't had a chance to get online and look. Everybody's like, I'm like, is this?
Yes.
No, this isn't L'Rell. Is this L'Rell? No, it's not.
Is.
It is L'Rell. So
But
it's
I had
L'Rell.
to check
Yes.
after check because she does look really different.
Yes.
Yeah.
I
And
will
then-
only say that unless this is something that we're not supposed to know and it's like her twin, but I think that's kind of stretching it. So Mary Chieffo did confirm and after Trek that it was her. I know it was shocking to hear her speaking English. And I think she did seem to look a little different. The lighting was different in this episode.
Was the lighting,
but yeah, we do have confirmation that it's her.
Yeah, she wasn't half blue and half green in this episode. So,
Yeah.
But it wasn't that she was speaking Klingon. I was just like, it didn't look quite like her, but maybe it was the lighting. But so we've got her. She's torturing Lorca for information, and again, this is crazy that they've got that information, and like their spy network or whatever is able to pinpoint where Lorca is. Right, and like get him off of his shuttle after he's leaving this starbase, which the starbase looked awesome. But
yeah, and maybe we'll get answers down the road. I've heard that question come up. It came up in our podcast, so I don't have an answer It is questionable.
Yeah, I did have a slight issue with how that happened, because I just thought, in a war situation where we're all on high alert, why are you sending your currently most important captain on a shuttle in a war zone with one other person? Why are you doing that? That didn't make sense to me. I was like, oh, that's just for the plot. So I had a little bit of an issue with that, but I could let it go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've got him. He's in this jail cell with Harry Mudd. And I think Rainn Wilson is awesome as Harry Mudd. I think he's doing a great job. So what do you guys think of Rainn Wilson?
Yeah, I was excited about this when he got cast, even cast as Mudd. I understand the concerns people have had with bringing Mudd back. He's a favorite character for some and not for others, but I had faith that this was not going to be the Mudd that everyone loves to hate, and that is what we saw. I think that he served as a good connection still to the people on Earth, with some of the comments that he made about, he just, was saying, oh, what Starfleet is doing up here and what are the people down there doing? Like, we don't know what's going on. I like that they connected a little bit of backstory with Stella.
Yes.
As part of his explanation. I think it was great that they referred to her. And I loved his closing line. This isn't you haven't seen the last of Harcourt Fenton Mudd or whatever. It was very Mudd to me. And even Stewart, it worked. And I think he did a great job, and I'm excited to see him again.
Yeah.
I have to say, I'm not that familiar with the actor myself. So when I heard about Harry Mudd getting cast, I was quite upset about it, actually. It was one of the things that really I wasn't happy about during the run-up, because I violently detested Harry Mudd. In the original series, I really had massive issues with him. So I wasn't thrilled about that, but I was kind of, as time went on and I kind of got to accept it, okay, we've got this guy, he's playing Mudd, etc. I'm kind of interested to see what they're going to do. I hope it's not hideous. But I was actually really surprised. Actually, I thought he worked really well in this episode, and I did like the actor as him. I thought he did a good enough job of being enough like the original Mudd that you could believe it was him without really offending me, if you see what I mean. So that really worked for me, and I thought he fit really well in this episode.
I've heard a similar reaction from most of the people that were apprehensive about having this character on Star Trek. I ran a poll earlier this morning, and for the most part, people either really loved him or he was better than they thought. So I think overall the reaction seems to be pretty good from fans.
I can't wait to see him again, because I know he's coming up in more. Because there was a clip in one trailer at one point where Burnham's like, "Are you mad?" "No, I'm Mudd."
That is so great. I have loved that. Like, when I saw that, I was already sold, but then I was like so excited.
It's such a cheesy line, though.
It is, but it's so good.
Whether that's next episode or the one after, I don't know, but
I wouldn't say I'm excited to see him again, but I'd say I definitely have less trepidation about seeing him again. So yeah,
right on. Yeah, no, I think he's good, but we've also got this guy Ash Tyler now. Okay, so I was a little confused in this scene as well. So was the first Starfleet officer that got his face kicked in the same guy as Ash Tyler? Or they now have 3 Starfleet prisoners on the ship? Well, 2, they're gone now, but I mean, did that kill that human? Like, I'm guessing it did. Like, they crushed his head or something, right? Like,
that was the sound effect there led me to believe that he was dead, and then Tyler was kind of like in a corner or whatever, kind of hidden, is what it seemed to me. Or maybe he was planted, like, because Lorca met him after he came back, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So perhaps then he was planted, which would feed into...
No. Lorca, he was there when they took... So Ash was there when they took Lorca away.
Okay.
Right, okay.
Right? Yeah, so Ash and Lorca were talking. Then the Klingons took Lorca away because Harry Mudd's little ant monster thing had got the information of the ghost quote, which, like, fed him out there.
Yeah.
But so I was a little confused on that. So I'm like, okay, so is this a third person, or what's going on here? So
different person.
That's
But
a lot of Starfleet prisoners then, though.
yeah,
So.
we definitely didn't see him in that very first shot, though.
Okay.
No.
So people are talking about. We got to talk about right now the theory that he's Voke,
Yeah.
right? And there's a lot of evidence that could support this. Namely, the guy that actually plays Voke. Like, I haven't looked into it, but I've heard people talking about. There's no stats for him on Internet Movie Database, and because of the last name Latif and like yada yada yada. Like, there's a whole bunch of these weird connections.
I'll clarify it really quickly
Please.
because I have to give a shout out to Bruce because he's the one that actually brought this up.
Bruce who?
Bruce Gibson.
There you go.
Yeah, there we go. So yes, the actor that supposedly plays Voke, who is Javid or Yavid Iqbal, I'll say. There's nothing out there about him. Like, no one's mentioned him. There's just nothing. He's a ghost in that sense. Shazad Latif that plays Ash Tyler. So Latif is, I believe, his acting name. His actual name, which I don't have right in front of me, is Shazid something. It's the same last name as it's Iqbal, the same last name as Javid Iqbal.
Yeah.
So to me, that is way too much of a coincidence.
Yeah.
For this to not work out. Am I going to say, well, yes, this is definitely what it is? No, because I don't know. But I personally, I'll let you finish the rest of the theory, I guess, but I'm definitely on board.
There's too many little things, isn't there, that on their own you might go, okay, but if you add them all up.
Okay. So I want to talk about my big theory here and how I think the season's going to end. So, so a friend of mine had messaged, and I hadn't read the theory because I hadn't been online yet, about how Voke was Ash. And he's like, I'm tired of hearing this already. And it was like right away. And I'm like, okay, well, I hadn't heard that yet. But now, and I didn't think, as soon as he mentioned to me the theory, I'm like, well, I don't think so. But the first thing that I want to point out is the first thing, basically, that Lorca says to Ash is, the guy says, I'm tougher than I thought. And then Lorca says, yeah, or you're a liar. Okay, so Lorca doesn't trust this guy off the bat, right? So I don't think that Lorca trusts him, and I think Lorca's got doubt in his back pocket. I really do believe that. Okay, now, part of me that thinks why he's not is because that fight sequence he had with L'Rell in the hallway didn't solidify the fact that I think he's a spy. But this is how I think the season's going to end. Lorca's going to call Ash into his office, and that tribble's going to go off. However, Ash is going to kill Lorca, and nobody else is going to find out.
Right.
So something's going to happen that he's going to get away with killing Lorca. Lorca will be dead, and we will know that Ash is a Klingon.
Yeah.
And nobody else will know. That's my theory.
I love it. I think it's a fun theory. I have noticed that the tribble has not been on Lorca's desk, however, in the last 2 episodes, I believe.
Because it's a predator to Saru. He would have eaten Saru.
Yeah, whatever the reason is, who knows? I noticed it. I will be entirely disappointed if at the end of this season, we have a bunch of tribbles on the Klingon ship. I don't want that. So this theory...
Will there be no tribble at all?
Perhaps. It's funny. Took me a minute there. But yeah, I think that's really interesting. I know there were some questions about the timeline and him really being on the ship for 7 months and this whole insinuation that he's got something going on with L'Rell, which I won't go into for my own reasons. That's a whole other discussion. If that were really the case and they were having some kind of intimate relationship, I think he'd have at least a bruise or 2, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I am as wary as Lorca is. However, I welcome the addition of Ash Tyler. I am quite taken with him as an actor. He's nice to look at. But I'm really curious to see what happens. I don't know if you guys watched the sneak peek for the next episode or not.
No.
Well, then we won't talk about that.
I've seen the picture of the shirts everywhere, but that's
yeah, which are sold out except for XXL.
because Mike Schindler bought them all.
He must have, yeah. But I'm curious to see how this works. I love that theory. So
Yeah, and I'm going to add something to that, and why I think that as well is because Brian Fuller was working on this show for a while, and the way that season 2 of Hannibal ended, you know, like we know how Hannibal works in the storyline there, and Brian Fuller did that. Is that Hannibal's getting painted into a corner, and he's basically almost found out, and he gets to a point where you can't see him getting out of this situation, right? And he ends up getting out of the situation, and I could not see a way for him to get out of the situation that he was painted into that corner, and he does. And I'm thinking something like that. We're going to slowly get this evidence where Lorca's suspecting him, and we're going to back him into a corner, and Ash is going to end up killing him, and then that's going to completely reset the board, I think, for season 2. So,
well, I'm going to miss Lorca. I've kind of expected that we're going to lose him eventually, and despite his questionable past, which we learned a bit more about this week.
Yes.
Despite that, I am fascinated. He's an enigma. I want to know more about him. I like him. Despite what he's done, I like this guy, and so yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I'm gonna quote Philip Gilfus from the Babel conference from earlier this evening, which was, "I'm turning into a Lorca apologist."
Well, the beautiful thing about this episode is the title. You know, and it's Choose Your Pain. And honestly, this applies equally to the situation that Lorca's in, as well as Lorca's backstory himself. Yeah. Because when we find out, I still don't quite understand why his eyes are like this, but he chooses to keep his eyes this way so that he remembers what happened. Like, he's choosing his pain. Yeah. Right, literally. And I don't know, I like that because it adds another depth to this character that we haven't seen. I think this episode completely throws the Section 31 theory out the water, out the door, because he's at Starfleet headquarters talking to them about it, and they're telling him to stop doing this jump drive and etc. So I think this perfectly... I'm no longer convinced this has anything to do with Section 31, right? So myself, but we got a lot of wonderful stuff with him, and I mean, like, he did a nasty thing. Like, I can't imagine blowing up a ship to save them. Like, how is this situation? How is he put in this situation where he blows up a ship and he ends up saving himself somehow?
And then Starfleet's okay with that and puts him in commission of another ship.
Well, that goes back to that scene when he's sitting there with the Admiral. And she says to him, "Why are you choosing Burnham? Don't give them another reason to judge you."
Yeah, right? Absolutely. So, but I mean, in the end, like, despite what he did and whether it was murder or euthanasia, he still got command of another ship, which to me, I have a lot of questions about Starfleet right now, and and what's going on there, because they must have agreed with his choice in the end to make him captain of Discovery.
Yeah, I think, which is why I'm really starting to come to the conclusion after watching it like 3 times now this week's episode, that what went on there in his past is nowhere near as simple as Mudd tried to make it out to be. And how did Mudd know about that as well, which interested me?
Well, it's probably news,
I guess,
people
but I
probably
mean,
know about that. Well, because the Admiral says don't let people judge you more, right? So I'm guessing this is news and people know about it.
Man, can you imagine being on the ship, like, well, I mean, number one, like, I think, this Discovery was a science vessel, and then, I can't think of the word, but got taken over, utilized now in wartime. So I don't think that Lorca was the original captain of this ship. I think that he was placed as captain after it became a warship and essential to the war. But imagine if, like, you're Stamets, and so not only do you have this warmonger of a captain, but you are aware that your captain blew up everyone on his previous ship but saved himself.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, I bet you this probably plays into a lot of the interaction that we saw between Stamets and Lorca in Context is for Kings.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this is a lot of backstory that they knew about that we didn't know about. And at the time, we're all like, well, what's going on this ship where there's just no chain of command and they're all talking nasty to each other? And here it's, well, they have no respect for this guy because he just killed his previous crew.
Yeah. I think that there are reasons for that, and I think that we're getting explanations for those
Yeah.
reasons. They may not be spelled out right in front of our faces, but we have how many episodes left to go for this half of the season. So it's, again, like, I want these answers. I hope we get them, because there's a lot of food for thought, but it makes for great podcast discussion, right?
Yeah,
sure
you bet.
we will,
This is a
yeah.
great episode. Like, this is my favorite so far of the 5 that we've got, and I love it. I'm looking forward to more. I think it's fantastic. So I'm gonna, my original. Some of my opinions that I had on the first 2 episodes still haven't changed. I still don't buy that those people, like, they weren't acting like they served together for 7 years, like in those first 2 episodes. I still don't buy this mother-daughter relationship between Georgiou and Burnham, right? I don't buy it. I still don't buy it, and that, to me, it seems forced in the episode. I got nothing against Georgiou. It's just I don't buy that aspect of the relationship, and I'm completely on board with Saru. So, 100%. So those are my final thoughts. So
I don't know, as a woman, I completely see the Georgiou Burnham relationship there, and I saw it especially in the books. And I think that the book technically is not canon. Some will say that it's canon until proven otherwise. But that gave some insight, especially into Saru and Burnham's relationship. Kind of a brother sister type thing. And what I thought was really nice in this episode was that final moment where Burnham stepped in to say, "You did a good job." Saru's not getting that, and that's what he always wanted from Georgiou. He wanted someone to look up to. He wanted that leader, and he's not getting that from Lorca.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
I thought that was a really great moment. And reconnected them, so that whole thing kind of came full circle. But this, Context is for Kings is still my favorite episode so far, but I think that Choose Your Pain is certainly the best episode overall. It's written so well. There is so much character development, really cool shots of the ship, full disco ball, as I call it.
Oh yeah, like this is the one where the camera was going along with it,
Yeah.
right? Like, I think it's so. I don't know. I'm not a fan of the spinning saucer section.
Oh,
but that
I
was
love
a
it.
killer shot. It was a really good shot. I don't know. I think it's a silly thing, and the way that the ship like spins quickly when it warps, I'm just like, what is going on?
I love it.
This is where, again, I'm just like, all right, it's science fiction. Like,
looks
I can't think about it too much. I'm just
It'll be
along.
vomit all over those walls. Like, I don't care what you're.
Seriously, yeah, I'm just along for the ride, and we haven't seen a ship like that. The only thing I can think of is in 2009, the Kelvin timeline, and the little thing that Spock is in, that little like bubble ship
jellyfish.
thing.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
jellyfish thing. It kind of reminds me of that. But overall, there's just, I think this episode had the most to offer. And they keep getting better, because we just keep finding out more and more. Our questions get answered. We get new questions at the same time. And I really hope that everyone who's watching will take a step back from things like the profanity, and stop focusing on that and focus on what has really been presented in this episode, because in the long run, one sentence does not kill an entire series.
Yeah, absolutely. There was so much to talk about in this episode. This was a major
absolutely.
episode, and it was much more than an F word. Like, but
it really was. For me, I think, like you, Brandon, every time we get to another episode, I like it more than the previous one, because as we're sort of bedding into the characters more, and we're learning more about what's going on and everything else. And I can't believe how much ground we've covered in 5 episodes. I really can't. It's astonishing. We could talk for days about what's been brought up and all the little theories and what they're doing with this and where they're going with that and all the rest of it. But I think the biggest thing overall for me is the fact that we are 5 episodes into this series, and I am massively emotionally invested in these characters. Massively. And that is rare for me. For me to sit down with a TV show and after 5 episodes feel like I really genuinely care to the point of, tears about these characters is
but let me ask
huge.
you a question on that. How many times have you watched each episode?
I've watched each. I watched this one 3 times, but the others I've watched twice each.
Okay, now how many other shows in as brand new shows have you watched that many times this quickly?
A few.
Really? Okay, then
Yeah.
then that's fine. I'll go with that because I
Not
haven't.
everything.
I mean, like I'm emotionally invested, and a show like Game of Thrones, like I've seen every season of Game of Thrones 3 times now, but not rapidly.
Yeah.
Right? Like this I've watched every episode 4 times, and I'm watching them 4 times in a week. Right? And I've never done that with a show ever.
Sure.
So I mean, like that's adding definitely to my enjoyment of the show. So. But I'm glad that you're so invested with it. It's wonderful. I mean, I am too. That's great. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love hearing that because on the opposite end, there are a lot of people that seem to be having difficulty connecting with the characters, and there's a whole other discussion behind that. So whenever I hear that other people are connecting the same way that I am, it's really great. It's a good thing.
Well, and I think as well, I think it's just a case of if I am emotionally invested, all of the little things, I can just let them go. Do you know, all the little niggly things that people have brought up? I'm like, I can just let that go because I care about the story and these characters. Like, people are saying, oh, the characters are so boring and they're not I'm like, really? How much... Like, you've given me so much to work with here. I'm like, there's just tons of questions about these characters. They're just all so interesting. I can't get enough of them. I really
you just
can't.
gotta watch the episode 3 more times each. Come on, that's all you gotta do.
Here in the UK, we're not getting the episodes. I don't know whether everybody's aware of this, but we're not getting the episodes until Monday morning, and we're getting them at 8 o'clock on Monday morning, and I am sitting on my couch at 8 o'clock on Monday morning, pressing refresh like a lunatic on Netflix, waiting for the next episode, and I'm like, getting to it, pressing play, skip recap, skip intro, because I'm trying to get it in before I have to go to work.
Again, it comes back to... let's have constructive conversations about what we like and don't like instead of harping on something, focusing just on all the negative stuff, because there is a plethora of really amazing stuff coming out of Discovery.
Yeah.
If you don't see that, in the words of, Bill Smith over at Trek Geeks, you don't want to see that. And so why even bother?
Yeah.
Well, I want to give a shout out to the listeners of Trek FM as well, because, for the most part, I think our listeners as well, they want to focus on the positive. We're not blind to the issues that come up. We're not blind to the problems that episodes have. We're not blind to the problems. But for the most part, we're willing to look past those things. We'll talk about them, but we're not letting it detract from our enjoyment of the show. So.
Yeah, I live in a great little world over on Twitter where everyone, for the most part, has great things to say about Discovery. My polls consistently have positive reactions, and so I think overall fans are very satisfied and happy to see what's to come, and those who have some issues are still watching and still giving it a chance.
Well, I'm going to give this episode a rating of 4 out of 5 needles in the eye. That's my rating.
I won't give my rating because it would include an expletive.
Well, I'm going to give it 4.5 out of 5 of those really funky little Klingon raiders with the really cool feather collar things they've got going. And I thought they were awesome.
Peacocks.
No, I have a name. It's the Livingston Raider.
Oh, marvelous!
I thought of was Livingston.
I like that. Yes, and how cool are they? I like them a lot.
I give it 5 Livingston chips.
Well, Heather, we're running out of time right now, so rather than telling us where we can find you, can you just tell everybody where we can't find you? Because I think the list is shorter.
Where we can't, wherever. Just disco_trek. Go there.
Go there.
Twitter.
Let's tell us about your podcasts.
Okay, so I'm LLA Posper on Twitter. My main podcast right now is Disco Trek, disco_trek on Twitter, and then I also host Shore Leave on Twitter via the Tricorder Transmissions Network. Just Google us; we'll pop up.
Okay.
You can find me elsewhere on Trek FM on our Voyager podcast. That's called To the Journey. You can find me in the Babel Conference, and you can also find me on Twitter, and my handle there is Choco Weeble. And I'm going to sign off with my favourite quote from this episode, which is, "May the sun and moon watch your comings and goings in the endless nights and days that are before you." Because I love that quote. I thought that was lovely.
Yeah, me too.
I'll finish with my favorite quote from the episode. Turn the lights down! Right on. Thank you, ladies. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, it's been fun talking about Choose Your Pain today, but this isn't the only thing we've been discussing on the network. So here's a quick look at some of the other things you may have missed elsewhere on Trek FM.
Previously on Trek.fm, Literary Treks.
Yeah, so Trip, of course, is working to take down Section 31. We as Star Trek fans who have watched all of the shows and read a bunch of other novels know how that's ultimately going to go. But in this story, he's, kind of convinced that Harris is Section 31, kind of the be-all and end-all. He's at the top. It's his own private little army that he's constructed, and Trip is aiming to take them down.
The 602 Club.
And this is happening a lot more in the Star Wars books, and I think it's because it allows them freedom, which is to do books that become character studies. And I think it's very clear that this book, in a lot of ways, is a character study of who this person is and what it is that causes the actions that we see in The Force Awakens to make more sense.
Stage 9, a podcast about the people who make Star Trek.
By getting people like Braga to come on board and work on this show, what they're going to be doing is deconstructing that thing that they did for all those years on Star Trek.
Earl Grey.
Is there anything else we need to add, or do we think that's the...
Are we going to cure Riker, or?
Oh shoot! I forgot about Riker. Yeah, sure, fine. We'll keep him around.
Yeah, we've cured Riker, and then for me, this would or not.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
So check out all these shows and join in the conversation about your favorite corner of the Star Trek universe and beyond. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're an Apple user, please be sure to hit the subscribe button at Apple Podcasts on iPhone, iPad, or Apple TV, or even in the desktop iTunes app to get the latest episodes as soon as they are published. And please leave us a star rating and a written review. If you're not an Apple user, we've got you covered as well. You can find our shows on Google Play Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Windows Phone, in most third-party apps, and you can stream and download the MP3 file from our website or grab the RSS link. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show, and there are many ways for you to do that. The best place to join in the larger conversation is the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type Babel, that's B-A-B-E-L, into the search field on Facebook, and it should come right up. If you'd like to send us an email, you can use the form on our website at trek.fm/contact. Choose Send to a Show and select The Edge. That will come right to us. You can also find the network on Twitter at TrekFM and on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. And if you'd like to find me, you can find me on Twitter at Brandon-Shea. I'm in the Babel Conference quite frequently. You can find me here on the network with Warp 5, where my co-host, Floyd, talk about Star Trek Enterprise. You can also find me over on the Fandom Podcast Network with my friends Chris and Tom, where we do a show called Good Evening, an Alfred Hitchcock podcast. If you'd like to help us keep all of our shows coming to you each week, you can become a patron of the network on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/TrekFM. That's patreon.com/TrekFM to get all the details. Perks include early access to episodes, exclusive content, producer credits, and more, available through our special patrons website, Patron Zone. It requires a great deal of money to produce, host, and distribute these shows each month, and we really appreciate any support you can give us. And we'll hope you'll join the team. Again, you'll find all the details at patreon.com/TrekFM. And at this time, I'd like to take a second to thank all of our wonderful associate producers here on The Edge. There's Norman C. Lau, Tony Robinson, Thomas Puleo, Lisa Slack, Shoab Mirza, and Richard Rutledge. Thank you everyone so much for your support of the show, as well as the support of the network. Well, that's all we've got for you this week. So tune in again next week as we travel on to the Edge.